welcome to Indo Politics. It was a week when President Connolly signed the International Protection Bill into law, while suggesting that someone else might like to challenge it in the courts. When Michael Healy-Rae faded into opposition obscurity, while reportedly seeking some sort of deal from the coalition. And when the money ministers said they would rein in spending, while at the same time promising some budget giveaways. This was a week that was all about having their cake and eating it. I'm Mary Regan, and to discuss all of this and more, I'm joined by Cónal Thomas, political correspondent with the Irish Independent. So the writs have been moved. I saw the posters just outside on my way in. The by-elections are underway officially.
Yes, indeed. May 22nd, polling day in Galway West and Dublin Central. I got a text from someone who shall remain nameless, giving out about the Green Party putting up their posters slightly before the writ was moved, but that's always one. There's always one. So I guess now we're what, about 4 weeks out. The rubber's kind of starting to hit the road after a few false dawns, I guess. There was a lot of coverage initially of Jerry Hutch, and we had a few interviews ourselves. So the state of play is, it's going to be tough for the government parties. We knew that. We're going to hear a lot of, governments don't win by-elections.
They're kind of wide open. We don't have any official polling. We don't really know where things are at. So it's all sort of ear to the ground, reading the tea leaves at this stage, isn't it?
It is. I mean, my own, you probably agree, but I think Fine Gael would have been in with a shot. And Sean Kine in Galway West and the Lord Mayor Ray McAdam in Dublin Central, in with a shot before the fuel protests and the crisis. There is a sense that's probably slipped away from them now.
They were putting in a huge campaign in Galway West, and Sean Kine had come so close last time. And then there was a feeling that they could pick up Fianna Fáil transfers, if not Fianna Fáil votes themselves. Yeah. So there was a huge sort of middle ground vote to get at there. But as you say, the fuel protests might encourage people maybe to stay at home, or encourage Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs not to vote? Yeah. Or how might it affect things? So
I think there's a couple of things. If you look at Galway West for a minute, this is feeding into probably a growing support for Noel Thomas, former Fianna Fáiler, now Independent Ireland. We know they're out front and centre, and they've gained a lot from the fuel protests at what is probably likely to be Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil's expense. What I'm picking up from Fianna Fáilers this week a bit is that it is quite difficult to galvanise their members down there in Galway West. That's on the back of the Jim Gavin debacle. It's on the Grania Shoiga kind of, parachuting someone in, and then the fuel protests. So
disenfranchised party support base there.
Yeah. There isn't a huge sense that, Labour and Helen Ogbu could do well. Green Social Democrats down in Galway West, probably not. Sheila Garrity, who's kind of the Catherine Connolly candidate, I think that initially there was a little bit of a sense of she could do, but it's not looking likely. We know Sinn Féin, we've had members there saying in the Gael talk they're not going to go out and back Mark Lohan, their candidate there as a former trade unionist. And then if you look at Dublin Central for a minute, we don't need to go over old ground here of how Mary Lou didn't get her candidate Gillian Sherritt over the line, and it's Janice Boylan. It's going to be an uphill struggle for her. Dublin Central's a little bit more kind of unchanged, I would say. There isn't a huge amount of momentum behind certain candidates, and the sense I'm still picking up is that it's going to be probably Daniel Ennis's, the Social Democrats, to lose.
So we're looking at a possible vista of Mary Lou McDonald, the opposition leader, the main party of opposition, at a time when the government is really unpopular, losing, not winning 2 by-elections, and then being outflanked by Soc Dems possibly in Dublin Central, to the left, and to the right, Independent Ireland in Galway West.
It'd be an incredible situation if Sinn Féin don't win either, because they have their Ardèche in Belfast this weekend. We know they're being squeezed on both sides, from both the right and the left, say from Independent Ireland, the Social Democrats, to a certain extent Labour. And if they don't win either by-election, we know Sinn Féin doesn't operate like every other party, but I think there will be serious questions for Mary Lou if they don't.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting if, as we say, there's a long way between now and polling day, and we don't have sort of data to go on at this stage. But if Independent Ireland win 1 seat and Soc Dems win the other seat, it's really a time for the smaller parties now, isn't it? Yeah. And the medium-sized parties, there are no bigger parties anymore, are struggling.
Yeah, and I mean, if the Social Democrats up their Dáil representation to 2 seats in Dublin Central, that'd be incredible. And we've talked about this before. If Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil don't win in Dublin Central, it'll be the first time in the history of this constituency that neither of those government parties will have a presence in that constituency. What's interesting, I think you'll find, there wasn't really any kind of, single big issue before the fuel protests, and that does seem to now be the big issue. It's cost of living, and that's what's going to come up on the doors. Interestingly, Sinn Féin's message since the new coalition has been to hammer the government nearly every single week in leaders' questions on cost of living. If they can't win a by-election based on that issue, where does that leave the party?
Exactly. And also the so-called loose independent, and also the left alliance that was supposed to build after Catherine Connolly's presidential campaign. That alliance, something that Sinn Féin appeared at that point to have the most to gain from, because Mary Lou MacDonald was looking to the left parties for transfers. She was looking to the parties of the left, hopefully, to help form a government with her, from her own perspective. But that left alliance, if it's facing its first big test in the by-elections, it's not really, it's not really materialising.
No, it's not evident. And I think when the left alliance worked successfully to get Catherine Connolly into the Áras, Mary Lou MacDonald, within days, scotched any prospect of a joint left candidate then in Galway West. But even if Sinn Féin are seen to shift rightwards to, say, the likes of Independent Ireland, that's not going to be enough for them in terms of any government formation. We're a long time off that. So it's really hard to see where the party stands. And this has been the problem with Sinn Féin for so long, is kind of yo-yoing between the left and the right. And you can see it in the poll figures. They're not going hugely down, but they're not going up, and they're not riding any sort of crest at the moment. I think it'll be really interesting to see the next Sunday Independent poll on this, to see what kind of damage has been done to the government parties as a result of the fuel protests. They'll be praying not much.
Yeah, and we don't know what the damage is, but if you listen to TDs from either parties, it seems to be a lot. Yeah. Speaking of Catherine Connolly, so she convened the Council of State earlier this week. It's a somewhat unusual move. It doesn't happen very often, but she wanted the Council of State to examine the constitutionality of the International Protection Bill. She decided after that meeting herself to not refer it to the Supreme Court, as is in her powers as president. But she sort of put it up to someone else, if a member of the public wished to do it. And she was kind of suggesting that she would have liked to have referred it to the Supreme Court. But under the Constitution, if it goes to the Supreme Court, is referred by the President, a citizen can't test its constitutionality. So is she sort of having her cake and eating it?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a kind of convoluted process, just to explain for a minute. I mean, the Council of State, this is the first time that she's convened the Council of State in her relatively short, I suppose, 5 months term as president. She stacked that Council of State, which was announced recently, with legal experts. That's natural in itself, and obviously native Irish speakers, two areas very close to her. The International Protection Bill is an overhaul of, effectively, the country's migration policy. It's seen as a toughening of the stance, and it's in line with kind of EU-wide move on migration and immigration policy. But so she convened the Council of State, and then it was decided it would not be referred to the Supreme Court. But there was two things she said. One was her concerns remain. That was quite pointed. So it was a bit like, okay, I've convened the Council of State, I've done the proper process, but I still feel concerned about this. And then in her statement, she also said, as you alluded to there, it does not close off any action sought by any person to challenge the provisions of the bill. I mean, you could argue the President should not be politicising any piece of legislation, but it's hard to read it any other way.
And it's not her job to have concerns about a piece of legislation. It's her job to either refer it or not refer it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So is she still sort of appealing to her support base? Is she still speaking to a certain cohort of the electorate? Maybe, parties and voters on the left may not have particularly, like this International Protection Bill. Is she still playing the political role there?
I think there's two things. One, we maybe should not be surprised at this commentary. I mean, this is Catherine Connolly. This is an outspoken left-wing politician who ran on an outspoken left-wing platform to get into the Áras and was backed, as you say, by those parties of the left, although there's a debate over Sinn Féin, but we've been through that. So that shouldn't surprise us. What is interesting is that she's made this quite pointed statement. She's trying to have her cake and eat it. Is this a sign, firstly, of more things to come? What's the government reaction going to be if this keeps happening? And look, do you remember Michael D was raging about how many pieces of legislation he had to sign at one point, his desk piling up.
Late on a Friday evening when he thought he was
exactly.
clocking off for the weekend.
But I do wonder, I mean, is there an element here, and I'm only speculating, but is there an element where Catherine Connolly might be struggling with the constraints of the presidency? I mean, it's not a role that you can really do much with. You are a figurehead and you have a constitutional duty to convene the Council of State, refer legislation, and you do all your other duties. I mean, on the one hand, it shouldn't surprise us she's spoken out like this. She's trying to have her cake and eat it, and to a certain extent, she's still that politician. But is there an element here where she's kind of just going, no, do you know what? I'm not going to let this presidency I'm not going to just sit back and be silent about it. The problem is that's just going to create more and more headaches for the government.
The government has previously tried to, push back a little bit when she made comments more recently on foreign policy. Now she's saying she has concerns about a piece of legislation. At what point does the government sort of really try to push back against Catherine Connolly's intervention, as some in government would see it, in matters of policy? I mean, they never really went there with Michael D. Higgins because his popularity with the public was so huge. They didn't want to be going against him. Are they going to take the same approach with Catherine Connolly, or are they sort of going to wait and see and just feeling their way through this approach?
I think it's too early to tell, but you're right. I mean, when she came out and she said that she called into question the legality of the war in Iran, US-Israeli war in Iran, the government quietly, or I suppose subtly, pushed back on that and just came out with a statement saying responsibility for foreign policy lies with the government. Now she's saying she still has concerns over this bill, which is being spearheaded by Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan. She says, and she's made the pointed comment that, look, anyone can challenge this, guys, go ahead maybe. I don't think the government I think you're very unlikely to see any sort of public rebuke. If she does more of this, what you'll find is gradually more and more ministers will be disgruntled behind the scenes, because speaking to senior government sources at the time of her election, they were very clear in what their position was, that she is the president, she's the president-elect, and we're not going to come out and say otherwise, even though government parties went against her in the election. Does it get to the point where she keeps pushing the boat? Possibly. Bear in mind, Michael D, I think, only referred, was it about 4 bills to his Council of State, one of which was actually around international protection, which was subsequently found to be constitutional, etc., etc. So, I mean, let's see what happens, but I can't see the government having any sort of public rebuke of Catherine Connolly. There's also no sense that, at least there's no sense I'm picking up yet, that the public either that aware of this kind of potential, tension that's rising or could be rising. And again, not unlike Michael D, people, the 63% of people who voted for her may just say, well, fair play to her, go on.
Yeah. Speaking of having your cake and eating it, the Kerry Eye is reporting that Michael Healy-Rae is now interested in carving out his own deal, separate from his brother, with the government. Is that a runner? I mean, no. At all. I mean, given the breach of trust that he announced his resignation without telling anyone in government beforehand, surely they're not going to cut him a deal.
They're not going to entertain that at all. I can't see it happening. I think the bigger question is, like, this kind of so-called rift now in the Healy-Raes. Like, we was seeing Danny Healy-Rae in Leinster House wandering around. He tried to move an amendment this week to not have himself removed from the Agriculture Committee. He was kind of slapped down by the Ceann Comhairle. He's been removed from that committee. But no sign of Michael Healy-Rae this week, right, from what I could see. The forestry minister
kept his head very much down, and not even willing to do, while Danny is doing some media interviews, Michael is not saying a word at the moment.
No, and there's these reports of a kind of Healy-Rae family rift. We know that Jackie, Michael's son, was quite upset in the public gallery when he made his resignation speech. He's obviously just lost a very lucrative special advisor job. Similarly, his father has lost a very lucrative junior ministry. Now, not that they necessarily need the money, but anyway, that's to one side. I think the question will be, firstly, the government are not going to entertain any sort of deal with Michael Healy-Rae. Why would they? I mean, he completely shafted them in many ways. And you could see in the Dáil chamber, after he made his resignation speech, Micheál Martin was there with his phone going, why didn't you pick up the phone? I think you've written a little bit about how when he went to hand in his resignation letter, Micheál was on the phone to Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister.
Yeah. And I saw Michael Healy-Rae coming out of the Dáil just after he made that speech in the no confidence motion, the front door, and he looked like a ghost. He was white as a sheet. He seemed very stressed, which is unlike him, and he was looking for his brother, and he had his son Jackie with him, and there was a sort of bit of frantic action looking for Danny Healy-Rae. And even earlier that morning with other family members, they were seen there, the two brothers having a meeting. So now we've these reports of a rift. So it looks like maybe Danny was the one who wanted to resign from government, vote against Micheál Martin in the confidence motion, and Michael might have been less sure on that because, let's face it, he had a junior ministerial role, he had his son in an advisor position, but that the government had said it was a 2-for-1 deal, and if Danny voted against, Michael was gone too.
It's the great kind of heartbreak for Michael Healy-Rae. You know, he has his constituency base who were extremely unhappy with the government over its response to the fuel protests. And as you say, he had this forestry ministry. The thing about Michael Healy-Rae that maybe hasn't really been kind of reported, but he was really highly regarded in the Department of Agriculture. Very highly regarded.
And people in the sector itself, the forestry sector, who I've spoken to, said he was actually a good minister.
I think one thing would be interesting, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are as well, is what happens with that ministry. Because I think Simon Harris has kind of said, we're in no rush. There seems to be talk that it might be subsumed into Martin Hayden's brief, possibly Noel Grealish's. Does that then leave open the possibility of another junior ministry opening up? Because remember how the government fought tooth and nail over the juniors, the super juniors, the record number.
Yeah, so they're not going to give it up now that they have it.
I can't see them giving it up.
And it would make sense if you were a party leader to kind of keep this prize dangling for a little while, particularly on Micheál Martin's side. If you have some of your TDs speaking out and revolting against you, you're like, well, here, I have a prize in my hand, and if you behave in the next couple of weeks, I might hand it to one of you. And
then what happens as well, that's a very good point, but what happens as well then to Michael Healy-Rae? Does he wander around the Dáil for the next 3.5 years like a ghost in the wilderness?
Well, this is a big problem because the sort of access to power and access to political decision making was an important part of what they did, because they were able to pull strings, they were able to get deals, and that's why they were a good political operation and why they got all the votes that they did. So even, going back to their father Jackie Senior's time and his coalition deal, the Healy-Raes need that access. And now it's cut off. So where does that leave them? Does it reduce their power? Does it reduce their ability to deliver for Kerry? What are they as a political brand now if they don't have any access to sort of the levers of government?
No, and you're absolutely right, because remember, Michael Healy-Rae was somebody who, look, a lot of ministers and government sources would say he overplayed his hand in terms of his public commentary around I did this and I got this done, etc., like the short-term lets, etc., that kind of thing. Funding for roads in Kerry is a big one. We would have had the National Development Plan. We would have had, we always have the annual roads funding for local authorities. What happens next year? He doesn't have that access now. Darragh O'Brien could be sitting there going, why? I'm not in Kerry. Have Norma Foley to fight the corner, but that's it. And the Healy-Raes are effective, canny, wily operators. If that influence is gone now.
And then there's this prospect of Jackie Jr., Michael's son, potentially running at the next general election. So is there going to be a sort of split in the Healy-Rae ticket, as it were, or could Jackie try to potentially outseat Danny Healy-Rae? I mean, there are all sorts of intriguing possibilities within the family and political dynamic of the Healy-Raes. Another sort of throwback to the past, even though he's not gone out of office that long, Leo Varadkar. He hasn't been able to stay quiet since stepping down as Taoiseach
No.
and leaving politics.
Nope.
He seems to miss it, maybe. He likes to have his name in the headlines. He likes to comment on what's going on in politics. You know, is he looking for a purpose within the politics that he tried to get away from?
I think... OK, so anyway, we know this week on the Path podcast last weekend, he said that he made some blunt commentary around rural Ireland and how it gets lots of subsidies and you're actually the benefit of lots of tax benefits, lads, and urban Ireland is actually really funding you. This obviously didn't go down.
And that they're a cost, farmers are a cost to the country, yeah.
This didn't go down well, particularly with Fine Gael base. So there's a couple of strands to it, I think. On your first point, clearly he can't stay quiet. Because he seems to be out every week with commentary or a column or a tweet about something, and he's even had rows on Twitter with people in recent weeks. So why is that? Well, firstly, he's still only relatively young. You know, he's only 46, 47 this year. He's had teaching posts, etc., etc. He hasn't followed his predecessor, Enda Kenny's kind of mantra approach, is that when you're out of the bubble, you're out of the bubble. Right?
Yeah. And that is a convention for former Taoiseach, you know, not to get involved in the politics of the day, you know.
Well, you might be able to touch on this as well, because I mean, I'm really interested to know what the sense from Fine Gael was on this, because the sense at least I was picking up was this is obviously a historically core part of their voter base, so piss them off and, you know.
Well, I think this goes back to the leadership contest within Fine Gael, where they had to choose pre-Simon Harris. They were choosing between Simon Coveney and Leo Varadkar. Leo Varadkar had the parliamentary party stitched up.
That's right.
In 24 hours. The party support base went for Simon Coveney. And really interesting, before that leadership contest kicked off, Leo Varadkar did an interview with the Irish Independent about his summers spent in Waterford at his mother's farm and really bigging up his farmer credentials at that time. Why? Because he wanted to win the Fine Gael leadership contest. So the grassroots of the party opted for Simon Coveney, the parliamentary party, and the way it was done and happened so quickly and they were promised jobs, etc., all went for Leo Varadkar. And I think that rankled at the time with the grassroots of Fine Gael. And the party never really recovered from it. The party's not won anything since then. The party's not won anything since Enda Kenny. And yes, they're back in government. And yes, Simon Harris is back in government. But they've never won an election ever since. So Leo Varadkar, you could argue when he became leader, lost a bit of the Fine Gael rural base. And now he's inflicting further damage from the other side when he's not even involved in politics anymore by just dissing on farmers for no reason.
If you're Simon Harris, you'd be sitting there going, what this week, right? Because you're quite right.
We more or less did.
That's true, sorry. Just to point out, I suppose, as well, two things. Simon Harris did distance himself from these comments, and he did say, we need to stop defining people by geography. And Leo Varadkar, was it just this yesterday, apologised, right? And he went to pretty much every media outlet to apologise and say, throw his hands up, I was too blunt. I stand over some of what I said, but I was too blunt in the way of saying.
And he didn't have to be forced into an apology. He kind of nearly opted, you know, he got onto newspapers to apologise.
Exactly. I think, so there's actually really a load of different strands to this. So I think on the one hand, bear in mind, Leo Varadkar always put his foot in it.
Yeah, he kind of enjoys it, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely, and we enjoy it, and it's entertaining. And when he was Taoiseach, he was incredibly blunt sometimes. Remember the comments about interns in Washington DC that he made over in Washington DC? Like this is a guy who has a history of putting his foot in it. It just doesn't help Simon Harris, because Simon Harris is somebody who isn't a rural leader, right? And Fine Gael's kind of on this journey behind the scenes where it has this process of renewal happening, this commission of renewal that's due to report to a special Ardèche, I think, this summer, later in the year. And Leo Varadkar to come out and basically, you know, bluntly putting a piss off a huge part of Fine Gael's historic voter base when there are already huge fears in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil that those voters are going to shift to the likes of independent Ireland now is massively unhelpful for the leader.
And disloyal, like not helpful to his former colleagues. And Sean Kine, who he served in government with as chief whip, to win this seat in Galway West. I mean, you know, it was not helpful and not very considerate for others in his party. So that was one headache for Simon Harris this week. Another headache for Simon Harris, which on the face of it should be, you know, something to be welcomed and something for him to be happy about and actually a help to him. But the big budget surplus has actually turned out to be a bit of a hindrance.
Yeah. It was quite a remarkable press conference, I think, we were at the other day, as maybe
thrilling.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
More than an hour.
Not everyone gets excited about surpluses, I get it. And
those charts.
Reining in spending.
I can see you getting excited about them.
But anyway, so, okay, yeah, the budget surplus went from 5.1 billion to 9.2. This at a time when inflation could rise to 4.5%, in the worst case scenario the Department of Finance put forward in these three scenarios, maybe unlikely to happen. It's weird, and I think Mary Lou McDonald, the Sinn Féin leader, actually did sum it up quite well in the Dáil, where she feels like we're living in two different realities here. Because on the one hand, we have a public expenditure minister, Jack Chambers, telling all government departments to rein in your spending. There's been massive overspend in education. There's now effectively going to be penalties for government departments that's going to impact their budget allocations for the following year. And on kind of Simon Harris's side, we've all this money. Where's the money? It's in the money room. That seems to be the approach. I'm being facetious there but the question, the core point in all of this is, what is that money used for, and how far would the government go in the budget? Yeah,
like the bigger picture and the problem politically is that, okay, there's going to be no recession next year, apparently. We're not in that territory, according to the head of the Department of Finance. But towards the end of next year, the end of 2027, then things could turn, okay, given what's going on in the world now. But before we get to that point where the economy could, you know, start to turn in a bad way, it's going really, really well. So we've a year of things going really well before things could get worse. And that year of things going well is extra pressure on Simon Harris and Jack Chambers at a time when they're coming under huge criticism from the public, because people are saying, well, you've billions in extra, you've billions in this corporate tax money, and why can't my kid get an appointment? Why am I struggling with the cost of living even though I might have a good wage? Why is the school not providing special classes? And why am I getting a tax break? And all these questions that people are asking, and all they see is all these billions. So it's a really difficult political balancing act for the government. But the way I read it the other day is that they're going to throw money at these political problems because they have it, and then something else happens in a year's time.
I think there's no point in forecasting anymore. That was my my takeaway from many ways. And I think what you're saying about like late 2027, in a way, I think that kind of just is a bit of a, you know, get out of jail kind of, we have to be cautious here.
Yeah.
Yes, there are massive headwinds. Yes, inflation could rise, and as Jack Chambers warned, stagflation. But in many ways, many people don't know what's going to happen. There's a strong likelihood that the fuel pressure will continue throughout the year, that it will spill into next winter. How the government responds, we'll see. But there's a couple of things. One, we know Simon Harris hasn't ruled out energy credits. We know he wants a tax package. There's only so much to go around. I think politically where the potential pressure point tension could arise is actually between Jack Chambers and Simon Harris. For the reason that when you had Michael McGrath and Pascal Donoghue there, they were very much singing off the same hymn sheet. And it was those two ministers, those two money ministers, who kind of started this narrative that the corporation tax windfall won't be there forever, lads. We have to be careful. We have to rein in our spending. And that's beginning to shift now, I think, a little bit. Because Simon Harris is saying this week we need to now have a different conversation around how we treat corporation tax in this country, effectively saying that some of it we know will remain here for many years to come. That changes the economic outlook or the potential budgetary parameters over the coming years. On the other hand, then, you've Jack Chambers, who's under constant pressure and criticism from ministers about having to rein in their spending and why they can't have more money. And Simon Harris will want to spend it. Now, it may be easy to deliver a tax package, but it's a lot less easy to explain to the public why they're not getting X, Y, and Z because government departments haven't reined in their spending. And I think that anything like giveaway stuff, if they want to go Charlie McCreevy on it, is going to be Jack Chambers saying, all right, you can do that, but not until I see discipline within departments, I see guarantees that you're not going to run over your budgets and we're going to have massive supplementary estimates this year. But politically, it's possible that some sides of the House and maybe Fine Gael would just throw that out the window and come budget time go, no, we're doing the tax package, we're doing X, Y and Z. So on the other hand as well...
So are we going back into the days of when I have it, I spend it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could be.
Because what I heard from that press conference is, we have it.
Yeah,
you know?
Oh, we have it. And I think the government has come under huge pressure because of the fuel cost. It caved and delivered effectively a €750 million package. It did a really unpopular budget last year. There was nothing in it for workers. And this week we had Jack Chambers come out, didn't we? Kind of changing his tune, saying there has to be something for the average worker in there.
Yeah, because he and the Fianna Fáil side had been more cautious about income tax cuts. But what it sounds like is that he was coming under pressure from Fianna Fáil backbenchers who are getting increasingly louder and getting increasingly vocal, you know, in terms of party policy. And Micheál Martin has to have some nod towards his backbenchers in the formulation of the budget because they're feeling left out of all these policy decisions. So they're looking for an income tax cut. And it looks like Fianna Fáil is now
on board,
swung behind the Fine Gael policy. So we can all look forward to October, income tax cuts, VAT cuts for hospitality continuing, excise probably extending till next year, given the war is showing no signs.
Sure, cut inheritance tax while you're at it, lads.
Exactly, let the good times roll.
Stamp duty as well. We had Seamus McGrath, the Fianna Fáil TD in the Dáil, saying that stamp duty should be done away with for first-time buyers, and Micheál Martin saying, yes, that's definitely something we'll look at.
Yeah,
so everything's piling up.
Yeah.
It's already piling
sure, look,
up.
We'll worry about it in 2028. It's grand. What could possibly go wrong? Well, that's all from Indo Politics for this week. We'll be back next week with plenty more to talk about. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to check out the Irish Independent for plenty more.